Okay, here's Shanny from earlier this week. This is he's being asked about Wilks, and here's his answer. And I want to finish the show with this one.
Said after the game about your own zero blitz at the end of the first half that it was something you discussed during the week. What have those conversations been like with Steve Wilks, and where's your understanding about what you guys were trying to accomplish with that?
Yeah, I think he knows. You guys, I think, talk to him tomorrow. He knows he messed up on that call. I have no problem with zero blitzes, especially when people need a lot of yards. If you need to get 20 yards to kick a field goal, I have no problem with the zero blitz. But I do when there's 16 seconds left, and that's where he lost track. There was no necessary need for that just because of the time. I have no problem with the call. I have no problem with that play call, but when it's that time, you can't do that. It's not an option.
There's been an update to this, Larry, that I think needs to be. There's been an update to that we need to probably also add for full context.
Okay, go ahead.
He said today also that he should have called the timeout before the play happened and changed the play, and he put that on himself.
The one thing that did not come up, and I didn't get a chance to ask it, is Shanahan on the defensive headsets?
Yeah, you should be. He's the head coach.
Well, you would think, but sometimes he's behind the bench talking to the players during the some offensive coaches. I know Sean McVay.
Talking about McVay going and sitting on. Do you remember when he used to go sit on the Gatorade tub?
Yeah, he let Wade Phillips have total autonomy. How much control does Steve have of these calls?
Well, I'll tell you how much control he has. He didn't have the control to come in and implement Steve Wilks' defense. He got to implement a defense that they evolved from the Seattle scheme, that Shanahan specifically wanted to integrate the wide nine into the Seattle scheme. That was not a Saleh idea. That was a Shanahan idea. And then this defense is what he philosophically believes it should be. So I don't think I think while Steve Wilks has autonomy to run the defense like any defensive coordinator does, because Shanahan runs the offense like the quasi coordinator along with being the head coach, I still think that at the end of the day, the buck stops with Shanahan. He's the guy that makes those kinds of decisions. And I think that in that moment, I don't think he ever expected Wilks with 16. Once he saw that ball get checked down to Alexander Madison and they wasted the 9 seconds, you got a running clock, 16 seconds. I think he felt like that was a moment. All right, they're going to run this clock out. They got utterly no chance of scoring. Let me start looking forward into halftime. And then out of nowhere, my guy decides to call an all-out blitz. And yeah, Mooney Ward should have picked that off, but Mooney Ward also shouldn't be left in a situation where it's him, the ball, the receiver, and if he messes up, it's a touchdown from 6 yards away with 16 seconds and no timeouts. That's utterly ridiculous, regardless of how the play resulted. The call was ridiculous.
And I agree, and I said it on the post-game show, and I don't need Shanahan or anybody else to tell me that was a ridiculous call to know that's a ridiculous call. There's one thing that I talked about in the post game. I said risk versus reward. That's why that's a ridiculous call, because the risk is great. The reward was nothing. And then it wasn't a bad call solely. It was a bad call played also poorly by the defensive back. Are you here for your own stats? Are you here to win games? Because the deflection is just as effective there as the interception. So what are you selling out for the interception for and letting the man get behind you when you should have played that more conservatively and go for the deflection? The deflection has the exact same impact. You're trotting to the locker room and you're getting orange slices, and you know what I mean? And you're down 3. Or if he completes
I think that's a little harsh.
Or if he completes it, no, because if he completes it, they get a field goal maybe. Okay. Then now you're down 6, but you can't let him get 6.
Okay,
that was a big misplay by Mooney Ward. It's not about your pick; it's about having the right awareness to make the right play for your team, and that was too much risk versus reward for Wilks, too much risk versus reward for Ward. Oh, reward versus Ward. The way it sounds. Anyway, too much risk versus reward there. And that's why it was a bad call. Now, there's 2 other cuts of this that I need to get your guys' thoughts on. I'm going to share the screen again. Here is Wilks today. And Wilks came into the room And he tried to kind of preempt it and be like, hey, I want to look ahead. I don't want to look back, by kind of owning it. Listen to Wilks and the way he falls on the sword here. Really interesting. Very prideful guy, but
I got
this is
to
what
be
he had to
honest
say.
with you. By the time I talk to you guys, win or lose, mentally, I'm on to the next game. And I know there's a lot of questions about the call right before the half. So I definitely want to address that before I move on to Cincinnati. Take full responsibility for that call. I have to do a better job in putting the guys in a better position. We have good players. I know that, and can't really press the issue, and with that, moving forward, it's my responsibility to do that. So I wish I could take it back. But again, I gotta do better. So this week, moving forward, I would say we have definitely a challenge ahead of us. Joe Burrow, in my opinion, is one of the.
All right. Well, that's the only part we need to show on that. But then I asked Chris Forster. So after Wilks, and I asked Wilks a couple questions. At this point, he's admitted that he made a mistake. The head coach has dragged him, right, publicly.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that. And it was very odd. These guys cover each other. And it seemed really odd that Shanahan would use such strong terminology as messed up, right? I mean, hey, that's, there's other ways to say that. Hey, yeah, we did. It's not necessarily what we wanted there. It's another way of saying he should have done something else. But to come out and say he messed up, I don't hear that. I've never heard coaches throw another coach under the bus like that in a public setting. To me, it was unbelievable that Shanahan went there. But I want to share the screen one more time. And I asked, because I didn't want to ask Wilks about it because it seemed so deeply personal. And he's such a good guy. And he's not just a good guy. He's a prideful guy. And it's like he already owned it. But I mean, I felt like asking him, how did you feel about the verbiage that Shanahan used there to describe it? But I didn't want to, belabor it that much more. So then Forster comes in next, okay? And I asked Forster, who's a longtime NFL coach, about this play and how Kyle kind of went into it. Maybe you can hear my question here, and then you can hear Forster. Here we go. Kyle came out and said that Steve messed up a call on the podium. How does that sit with coaches when a coach criticizes you publicly?
Great question.
Directly. Is that just part of the territory? Is that something easy to deal with, hard to deal with?
It is for me. I mean, it's easy to me. It is what it is. The hardest thing is you can't. You say, well, nobody really understands when you say that because you really don't know. It's hard to explain to people that aren't inside working it every single day. It's a very, there's a lot that goes into it. But in the same sense, you can't hide and say, well, there's nothing wrong. And so you just admit it and you live with it and you understand that the court of public opinion is going to be what it's going to be. And some will understand and have a good understanding of what you're talking about. Others won't. And that comes with the territory, with the job. The more people sit out here, the more people fill those stadiums, the more people, internet, all the things that go on with it. I know that one thing's happened through the course of that time is salaries have gone up. And with that salary comes you have to take the heat for the job that you do, and you have to stand and be accountable for the things that you do, because there are more people interested. There are more people that are analyzing you on television and radio and everywhere else, and it comes with the territory, man. It's what it is, and you have to understand that you control what you control, and what you do control is the job that you do, and whether somebody appreciates the job you do or doesn't. And when the head coach, if he wants to stand up and say the offensive line didn't play well enough, he's the head coach. He's in charge, and that's. Does it bother me? He didn't play well enough.
So there you go. And I just thought, I felt kind of weak asking Forster that, to be totally honest, guys, because I wanted to ask that question to Wilks, but then I kind of felt like that's I don't know, just seemed like you'd be piling on Wilks because he already kind of owned the mistake. And, how does it feel when but give me your thoughts on all of it, because it seemed out of character. It seemed a little odd. Usually these guys are covering each other. But Shanahan, and then we had somebody suggest that the front office is dissatisfied with Wilks. I haven't seen those reports, so there's nothing I can say to that. But I thought it was really interesting hearing Chris's thoughts because he's also a veteran coach, and the way he kind of, G. Martinez says Krug had mercy on Wilks. I do like Wilks, I really do, and I just felt like he had had enough. You know what I mean? It was like he was getting beat on, and you could see the pain that he had in his face there. And he kind of knew that he screwed up, and he got raked by the head coach publicly. And I'm just kind of wondering. I mean, I believe in accountability too. And heck, I had guys in the Canadian League called me "F you, Larry" the whole year. And if I made a mistake, I got dragged for it. And he said, "Hey, look, the salaries are going up. In other words, this thing's big now. Everybody cares. Everybody's watching. It's all out there. And there's internet, and there's YouTube, and there's everything else, radio, television, and you got to be accountable, and I'm cool with it. And the head coach, he wants to call me out. He can. And these guys call out their players. So if the players get called out by the coaches, why shouldn't the assistant coaches get called out by the head coach? And why shouldn't the head coach get called out by the owner? I mean, doesn't everybody have to be accountable? But did Kyle cross the line to you guys? And do you think that there's going to be fallout from that? Give me your, and I respect the hell out of you guys. You guys observe this as much as anybody and have a good sense of it. What is your take on the way Kyle dealt with the problem, and then Steve's reaction to it, and then Forster's kind of perspective on it?
I think that it was a bad play call. It was a bad time to make that play call. So let's get that out of the way. I agree on that. I love that he took accountability in front of the media, Wilks. I don't necessarily have a problem with Kyle calling it out and being honest if he didn't have a way to stop it from happening. And he did. I mean, he was on the headset. And that's where I have the issue is like, okay, you could have stopped this from happening. And when I said this yesterday, a lot of people gave me pushback. Well, I mean, what if he's talking to the offense, or what if he's okay? But you had 2 timeouts. You could have called the timeout. You knew what was coming. Everybody was watching like, okay, there's a blitz coming, very likely here. You could have called the timeout. So I thought that was a little, I don't know. Forrester might be fine with being called out, but that doesn't mean that Wilks is. Everybody's different. Everybody, and as a leader, you have to know who's okay with that and who's not. Maybe Wilks is okay with it, and this is not a big deal. But maybe he's not. And maybe he feels like, hey, man, like, it's kind of demeaning. You know what I mean? Like, I'm here running your choice of defense. I acquiesce to that. I've been in this league for a long time, too. Like, it's a bit disrespectful. Or he may not think anything of it. He may be fine. But I do like that Shanahan also did come out afterwards and say, you know what? Ultimately, I should have called the timeout. I knew what was happening in that moment. I had 2 timeouts. I should have called the timeout. Yeah, you should have called the timeout. And none of this would have happened at all. None of it. So that was a missed opportunity by Wilks with the bad play call, and it was a missed opportunity by Kyle to not stop it in the moment, knowing he didn't feel comfortable with it, knowing he's the head coach, and knowing he had 2 timeouts. He should have called the timeout and stopped it from happening as well.
Yeah, I kind of have a similar but not the same exact perspective. I think that Shanahan's answer today should have been his initial answer and answer after the game. I thought there were a couple parts that were particularly weird about it, including one when he said, oh, you guys are going to be talking to Steve Wilks, as if he was just leaving Steve Wilks out to dry to answer this question. Shanahan's the head coach of this team. He takes accountability when things go wrong. He's the first person that should take accountability for it. And whether he does that internally, whether he does that externally is somewhat irrelevant to me. I cannot speak on how this did or didn't affect his relationship with Steve Wilks, but I do think the way he went about it was a little bit weird, especially given that he had culpability in what happened. The one thing I will say about what Forrester said, I think Forrester just gave perspective on how coaches last in this business and what their mindset needs to be. That doesn't necessarily mean that that perspective is correct in terms of they being that means then criticizing them publicly is fair. I guess my biggest issue was Steve Wilks had to come out like a martyr for the loss. Yes, that was a terrible call. There's no excuses for the call. That call was not the only reason that lost the 49ers that football game, right? I didn't see Christian McCaffrey had to come out and issue a public apology for fumbling in the red zone. I didn't see Mooney Ward have to come out and issue a public apology for dropping an interception into Jordan Addison's hands. You know what I mean? I didn't see anybody else have to issue, like Dre Greenlaw, Fred Warner. These are high-level players, missed tackle after tackle in that football game. It feels like Steve Wilks is dying on the sword for it, and it was a terrible call. But ultimately, I don't think that he needed to be the one that had to come and take public accountability and all, and that's kind of my only issue from it from that standpoint. It seems anyway like he had moved on from it. He addressed it and went on to answer questions about Cincinnati. Shanahan then made the correct statement today. I think that's about it that there is to that situation. My only main issue was Shanahan directing it like, oh, you can ask Wilks question tomorrow. They're not equals. He's his superior. He doesn't do the, oh, you can just ask questions to Wilks about it. He's the manager. When we talk to Steve Wilks and we're not getting a satisfactory answer, we say, let's talk to the manager. And the manager is Kyle Shanahan. He's the guy in charge. He should have an answer for what the guy under him is doing, not vice versa.
I'll give you my perspective on it. I've seen, I used to work in pro football in the Canadian League and in the NFL, but in the Canadian League, I was quality control. And so I was a defensive quality control coach. So I would sit with the defensive coordinator, the linebacker coach, the secondary coach. The defensive coordinator was the D-line coach. Or I was the linebacker coach, I should say. So the linebacker coach / defensive coordinator, the D-line coach, and the secondary coach, and me would sit there and watch the film. And we would go through all kinds of every aspect of the thing. It would take hours and hours and hours. 3 or 4 times a fist fight broke out in the middle of the film session where the linebacker coach said, man, that was on the DBs. And the DB coach said, no, that was on the linebackers. And essentially they're blaming each other and fists flying, dip cups and stuff flying and blows being thrown and bloody lips. And I mean, it and at the time I was 25 years old and I was like, whoa, this is not your typical workplace environment. And I remember talking to the guys we were calm after these fights, we're joking around. Now we're over it because we would always, fight it out, talk it out. But I mean, literal brawls breaking out. And they would say, hey man, this isn't IBM. This is not a corporate world.
Oh, just taking a shot at the tech guys, huh, Larry?
They were just saying like, this isn't a corporate America. And you know what? There's something really refreshing about having it out. I mean, there's something really healthy about having it out. Now, is it healthy? You would never have it. You would never brawl in corporate America. But you might have resentment that builds up over time. When you do fight it out and you're really brutally honest with each other and there's nothing left unsaid, you know what? It's kind of the way football is. I mean, the players, the coaches are direct with the players. Direct. You F this up. They may not say it that way, but they may say it that way. The coaches are direct with the players. The head coach is direct with the coordinators. The coordinators are direct with the defensive coaches if it's a defensive coordinator, or offensive coaches if it's the offensive coordinator. Direct, pointed, borderline dysfunctional, but no ambiguity about what the points are. And it's just it's a tough world. And it's like in that world, in their world, it's healthy to call it out. Now, do you need to say messed it up in front of the media? That's the part. It's like the verbiage, that's a little bit, because like Steve's got to command the room. And if you call him out in front of the media, the players also hear that and see that. And does he lose face with his players because the head coach calls him out? I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, it really just shows them that he has to be accountable for what he does, and they have to be accountable for what they do. And something that they do wrong ultimately could get him yelled at. And it's a very powerful thing. Bill Walsh, when he would yell at players, he would say, and Bubba Paris told me this, former Niner offensive lineman, that when Bill Walsh was mad at Bubba, instead of saying, "Bubba, you need to do this," he would say, "Hey, McKittrick, can't you get Bubba to do that any better?" And that kind of reverse mindset actually is a motivator, because you as the player don't want to see your coach yelled at for something that you caused. And so Bubba told me, "Hey man, I always wanted to be the best I could be because I didn't want McKittrick to get yelled at by Walsh because of my ass." And in a lot of ways, Wilks is wearing, now this is a call that's directly on him, but it kind of tells the players, hey, we have total and utter accountability in this organization. And you can call it dysfunctional or you can call it healthy. It is what it is, and we're going to have it out, and nobody's above the blame, and nobody's above being questioned to their face directly. And there's no sacred cows.
But
so I think it's
behind
in
closed
the weird
doors
way,
is
I think
so
it's actually
different
good.
from doing it publicly, and that's what I wanted to get to, because
Yeah,
I feel like, okay,
publicly-
yeah, all of that happens behind closed doors. I think there's an understanding for all of us that it's there. We never see this get out publicly where a coach goes, "Yeah, ask the defensive coordinator about that call." Usually they go, even if it's a situation where you ask the defensive coordinator about that call, they say, "You know what? Whatever happened, it's on me. It's a bad call. Let's move along." Instead, Shanahan was like, "Yeah, I didn't know what he was doing. Like, you can ask him. Like, he obviously messed that up." That was his first.
But don't you think
initial
that
reaction.
shows, Vish, that he gives Wilks autonomy, and maybe he won't going forward, but that he gives his. I get the picture that Shanahan's like a czar of the offense and gives his defensive coordinator autonomy.
He's not. Him and Steve Wilks aren't equal. That's the problem with that autonomy. It gives the impression that him and Steve Wilks are 50-50 CEOs of this company. Shanahan is the 100% CEO and manager of this business. If you own a business, you're the manager and I'm your assistant. You can give me autonomy to do whatever I want publicly. But at the end of the day, it is not Larry Krueger and Vish Kumar, an owner of this business. It's Larry Krueger, owner of this business. Whatever happens in the business, it comes down to Larry Krueger, not me, or not Wilks in this case. And that's where I think it was a little unbecoming of Shanahan to do that.
Do you think there's fallout, guys?
No.
Some people seem to think that there will be.
Well. No.
There could be. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, it all depends on Wilks' personality. I mean, maybe Wilks is the type, like I said, that could be totally fine with this. I don't know. Maybe he's not.
Yeah.
Not sure.
What'd you think of the way he handled it, though? He was like, "Hey, look, he owned it, but then he also tried to like steer it to this week and not want to look back." And then he got several questions about it, even despite the way he kind of fired that opening salvo with, "Hey, I own it." He still had follow-up questions. I mean, do you think should there have been follow-up questions, or should the media just said, "You know
fair.
what?"
Look, I am not that guy that thinks that the media should throw up softball questions and not ask these guys anything or not put any pressure on them. But it's it's up to the coaches or players to say, "Hey, next question," or, "You know what, I'm not answering that," or, "I'm going to give you a canned answer." But your guys' job in the media is to ask those tough questions. It just is. So it's all fair. I think the questions are totally fair. I don't think he has to continue to answer them once he takes accountability and he says he's on. He can be like, "I already answered that. Let's talk about the Bengals. I already answered that. Let's talk about the," that's how he could have addressed it. So, but I think it is totally fair to ask the question. Yes.